Hello, good morning, good evening, and welcome wherever you're tuning in from. This is From a Place of Self. My name is Dal Grunga, and I'm so glad you are here. This is your regular reminder to take a moment to be able to go inside and be able to check on what's going on in your inner space to see how much am I living from a place of self. And we're reading this wonderful book by Dr. Richard Schwartz called You Are the One You've Been Waiting For as a companion for us to journey through our inner work of internal family systems. And I'm reading this section here, it's on page 7, where he's talking about becoming the primary caretaker of our part. So we've been discussing this idea of what it means for us to be the primary caretaker of our parts within ourselves. And what happens with most of our parts is they, very early on in life, get wounded, carry these great burdens of shame, of insecurity. There are three main ways in which our young, vulnerable parts carry burdens: through extreme beliefs that I am unworthy, I am unlovable, I am too much, I am too little; extreme emotions of fear, shame, guilt, anger, anxiety; or extreme energies of emptiness, hollowness, scatteredness, right? And those parts of us then become the governing features of our life. And rather than recognizing where we need to go in and do our inner work, we end up making decisions from those places. We end up living our life from those spaces rather than from a place of authentic self. So becoming the primary caretaker of our parts means being able to recognize those parts of us that need attention and do the work of reparenting ourselves so that those wounded parts actually become our greatest resources. They become our sources of joy and intimacy and creativity and spontaneity that make up the colorful aspect of our personalities. So Richard Schwartz says, fortunately, there is a way to unload the pain and shame that drive these patterns within us. And by patterns, we mean that there's this vulnerable part within me that's carrying my shame, that's carrying my guilt, that's carrying my belief that I'm not enough, that I'm too much, that I'm unlovable, that there's no hope for me, etc., etc. And then other parts of me jump into action in order to respond to that in some way, either preemptively. Never again am I going to feel the shame of being rejected when I was a kid. Never again am I going to experience the pain of being bullied at school. Never again am I going to experience the failure of my first business or the failure of my first marriage and all of the shame that came along with it. Never again. So I'm going to make sure that I live my life in such a way that I'm so perfect, that I'm so controlled, that I'm able to manage all of my external environments in such a way that everybody is able to shower me with praise, or I'm able to look in the mirror at the end of the day and say, yes, you were enough, based off of my external activities and achievements. But life has a way of, regardless of how much we try to control the circumstance, count all our calories, get everything knocked off our to-do list, somehow, some way, those insecure parts of us bubble up and they pierce through, and then the reactive parts have to kick in. And those reactive parts are the one that, now that the shame is here, that it's going to come in and it's going to say, at whatever the cost, I'm going to get rid of this feeling that's overwhelming my system right now. And we reach for the alcohol, reach for the drugs, we call that ex-partner, we do whatever it is: shopping, sex, food, drugs, TV, numbing out, sleep, fill in the blank. And normally in the therapeutic self-help world, we're dealing with the symptoms of something that's much deeper within us. I'm dealing with the symptom of a fear or anxiety or an anger that's deep within me, and the symptom is the fact that I'm drinking, or I'm sleeping around, or I'm eating too much, or I'm controlling my diet, or I'm binge watching on a television show, or whatever it may be. And so that's the symptom of something that's much deeper. And so we try to control that symptom by building new habits or trying to control ourselves and to discipline our way into a new way of living. But the reality is that actually there's a core wounded part of me that's been carrying a burden that it's not supposed to be carrying. And so Richard Schwartz says, fortunately, there is a way to unload the pain and shame that drive these patterns. And the first step toward that goal is to shift our focus. Most of us, me included, scramble to avoid our inner life and keep our attention fixed on external solutions that include finding or changing a designated redeemer. A designated redeemer is that special someone that's going to make it all better. That knight in shining armor, that shining princess, that special someone that I think is going to come into my life and change the narrative and make me somehow worthy. And granted, yes, relationships are extraordinarily valuable for us to have. We want to share our life. We have our partners. We have our friends. We need our tribe. We need our sangha. We need people in our life that lift us up. But we can't replace that work with a false redeemer. And so he says here, we scramble to avoid our inner life and keep our attention fixed on external solutions that include finding or changing a designated redeemer. It means we have to find that perfect person, or maybe some of us have done this. We turn people into our personal projects, right? We ignore all the red flags and we think, once we get married, then, things are just going to get easier and he's going to tone it down or she's going to pick it up. Or once we move in together, once we live in the same city, then, everything's going to get better. Okay, we're married. Once we start having kids, once we have our first kids, once he stops drinking, once he gets a new job, those behaviors aren't really something that I should be looking too much at. It's really just the fact that once he, turns the corner in his life, or if I'm patient enough, then he'll start to change. And we start to think about how I need to act in a certain way in order to somehow create the environment for them to be the someone that I need. Al-Anon is based on this principle. 12-step program for people who are in intimate relationships with people suffering from alcoholism. People who have addictive parts in them that govern their lives. And now my whole life is somehow determined by trying to make you sober, because I feel like if I can get you to quit drinking, then that'll make my life stable. And so we turn people into our projects. And alcohol can just fill in the blank. If I fix your anger problem, if I fix your attitude problem, if I heal your traumas, if I fix your mommy issues or your daddy issues, or I fix whatever it might be, if I get you to become more responsible, if I can just get you to start making more money, if I can make her do whatever, fill in the blank, then I think that will be the solution for me finding the space that I've been looking for inside my life. So we try to find external solutions that include finding the right person, or just finding everybody and thinking I can change them into the right person. I try to get couples, this is Richard Schwartz speaking in his book, to do a complete U-turn in their focus, moving them toward rather than away from the inner worlds in which they fear to tread. When people listen deeply inside, they encounter a host of different feelings, fantasies, thoughts, impulses, and sensations that make up the background noise of our everyday experience of being in the world. I'm going to read that again. When people listen deeply inside, they encounter a host of different feelings, fantasies, thoughts, impulses, and sensations that make up the background noise of our everyday experience of being in the world. And when people remain focused on and ask questions of one of those inner experiences, they find that it is more than merely a transient thought or emotion. Within each of us is a complex family of subpersonalities, which I call parts. I'm going to pause there for today and focus on this idea that when we often spend so much time trying to escape our inner world, and most of the time it's a reflex reaction of a part within us that's very strategic. Some people say I have a hard time paying attention. You don't have a hard time paying attention. Most of us don't have a hard time paying attention. We just have very strategic, experienced parts that don't like us to spend too much time looking inside or being present with ourselves because they don't think it's safe. Or they're afraid of what we're going to find in there. Or they don't think that we can handle what's going to come up if we're still for too long. And so I think I've got ADHD, or I think I've just got a short-term attention span, right? Well, the reality is that most of us, our parts have become very good at making sure that we don't sit still for too long. Because there was a period of time in our life where it was dangerous to sit still for too long. There are things inside of ourselves that can feel like too much. But when we live life from that place of self, and this is the healing balm that exists within internal family systems, this is the foundational thread within all spiritual traditions around the world, is that Healing can't take place outside of a spiritual context because it is the inherent sense of our being that can hold space for whatever's taking place in our inner world. When we're kids, when we're young, we don't have access to that as much because we don't have the tools and the resources to be able to connect in that way. But as adults, we do have that access, and we can spend compassionate time being able to spend with our parts in such a way that we can give space for our true self to emerge and be present and start to hold space for those wounded parts inside of ourselves. And when we do that, those protective parts that reach for the bottle, that reach for the joint, that reach for the remote control, that reach for the whatever it may be, the shopping cart, that think that we need to be distracted all the time, we can start to change the narrative internally. And we can start to build relationships with both our protective parts and ultimately the exiled parts inside of ourselves so that we can become the leader of our own system. And I can stop putting that onus on other people to do it for me. And the miraculous, amazing thing, and this is something that Richard Schwartz found, that I find that is a phenomenon worldwide, that when we focus on changing the landscape of our inner life, it naturally has a reverberating effect to start creating shifts and changes in the external world around us. We start to attract different things in our life. Certain things that bring us down become less interesting. We develop a sense of natural clarity of when to hold on or let go of someone or something. We develop a natural sense of confidence that's not to be confused with arrogance, of knowing that I'm connected to spirit, that I'm connected to something far greater than myself. And it's no longer me alone as some wounded part of myself trying to figure it all out the way I've been doing for the last 30, 40, 50 plus years. One of my IFS coaches told me at one point, we have, yes, wounded, vulnerable parts within us that are running the show, and they're 6 years old with 30 years of experience. They're 6 years old with 50 years of experience, right? So they've been doing it a long time, but they're just still wounded children within us. Those aren't the ones that are meant to figure it all out. It's our core sense of inner being, our self, the you that isn't a part. And there are some parts in you that don't want you to believe that because they don't think it's true and they don't want you to get disappointed. Or the times where you were in self in a younger, vulnerable stage of your life and you were seen was a time when you were exploited or taken advantage of or got hurt in some ways. And so there are parts that may even, out of good intention, block or try to avoid you coming into yourself. Those are parts worth spending time with as well. And therefore he writes here that I love so much, I already read a couple times, I'm going to share it again as a take-home for us, is that when we start to listen deeply inside, that itself is such a huge practice. How often do I listen inside? We encounter a host of different feelings, fantasies, thoughts, impulses, and sensation that make up the background noise of our everyday experience of being in the world. And when we can remain focused and get curious, curiosity is a foundational doorway into self-energy. By asking questions about just one of those experiences, we have a multiplicity of human psyche. And sometimes we think I'm going crazy because I want 5 different things. There are multiple conflicting thoughts in my brain. There are multiple conflicting emotions in my heart. And I'm trying to figure out what's the right one? What's the wrong one? Which one should I listen to? Listen to all of them. Don't do what all of them say, but listen to all of them. Understand them one at a time. Another one of my IFS coaches says that the way that we interact with our parts is like the attendant at the return counter of a Walmart the day after Christmas. Everybody feels like they've got the most important thing they got to do. Everyone's a little disgruntled. Everyone's screaming at once, and it's like, form a line. We're going to get to everybody, but we can only do it one at a time. And we have space for everybody. So one at a time, we start to connect with all of those myriad of fantasies, thoughts, impulses, and sensations. And we find that it is more than merely a transient thought or emotion. that within us is a complex family of subpersonalities. And Richard Schwartz uses the word family. It could be tribe, community, society of parts. And these parts are the reasons we can simultaneously have so many contradictory and confusing needs. The American poet Walt Whitman got it right in Song of Myself, quote, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes." End quote. So do we all contain multitudes, thus the Oracle of Delphi's admonition to know thyself should really be to, quote, know thyself. So what I want to invite you today as your takeaway is just ask, where am I creating space to what I like to call have some meaningful alone time with yourself? And we can extend that to say some meaningful alone time with my parts. And something that we can find helpful rather than thinking that I now have to go and take care of, somebody told me just today, they said sometimes we think about this idea of having an inner child. I feel like I have an inner kindergarten of children that need attending to, and it can feel overwhelming. That's because that's another part, a fixer manager part of you that's trying to do the work for you rather than letting your core self, which is connected to higher spirit, be that natural presence. And also because we don't have to rush in and fix anything. Sometimes just having an inner awareness and acknowledging parts that are there. So many clients and people that I work with, in the very first session, will have a revelation and just say, I had no idea that that was a part of me. I just thought that was me. I thought I was a rageaholic. I just thought I was an addict. I just thought I was angry. I just thought I was depressed. I just thought I was anxious. I just thought I was a worry Nelly or a Debbie Downer, right? I just thought I was scatterbrained and disorganized, rather than that's a part of me that needs some loving attention. And we just can be aware of that and start to notice the multitude of parts within us and just acknowledge them and start to be aware of them before taking the next step, which is starting to build a relationship and just listening rather than telling them what to do or go away or turn it up or turn it down. You'll be amazed at the healing experience of just acknowledging and recognizing those parts. And that's far more effective than trying to change the life of another person. The ACOA Serenity Prayer says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know that that one is me. So we are the steward of our own inner world. And I pray that we all take up that task very seriously. And it's rewarding work, and you have it in you. I know there may be parts of you that feel lonely, that feel scattered, that feel left out, that feel hopeless. Good for you, Dial. I'm glad you have your podcast and sharing all this stuff. That's really great, but you don't know my story. And you're right, I don't know your story. But I know the framework of your story. I know the experience of your story. And I know that there may be parts of us sometimes that tell us that our particular life is too broken, or we don't have access to a core sense of self, or whatever it may be. But the reality is that there's hope for all of us. There is a connection that each of us have, and the proof is that you're right here listening to me right now. There's a divine light that guided you here to this moment. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't still be listening 15, 20 minutes in, wherever we're at. So there's a divine light that's guiding you, that's brought you to here, that's carried you. You have a 100% success rate in every day of your life thus far. And there's a divine light that's guiding you. And I encourage you to take that inner journey. And I'm so grateful to be with you on it. And I love being able to be in touch with you. Please, please, please stay in touch. If anybody would like to ever reach out, you can reach me, Dayal, D-A-Y-A-L, at consciousearthinstitute.com. You can find me on Instagram at dial.garunga or at the IFS Coach, or visit my website, consciousearthinstitute.com. And I'd love to be in touch and share more of this work with you. Please have a wonderful day. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.